The rain was a persistent, mournful drizzle, clinging to Serene's eyelashes like unshed tears. It mirrored the damp chill that had settled deep in her bones, a coldness that Liam's warmth could never thaw again. The small churchyard in the village of Lower Puddleton felt vast and empty, the scattering of mourners, no more than 7 souls, amplifying her isolation. Each stood a respectful distance apart, heads bowed, a silent testament to Liam's quiet life. Serene, a wisp of a woman in a black dress that seemed to swallow her whole, stared at the polished mahogany coffin. Her thin frame trembled, the freckles on her nose stark against her pale skin. She traded her city life, her meticulous balanced spreadsheets, for this. A quiet life in the country, a life with Liam. Now, all that remained was the sting of loss and the dull ache of what could have been. The trailer fabricating company's books were still meticulously balanced, but her own life felt irrevocably off-kilter. From beneath the ancient yew tree at the edge of the churchyard, a figure watched. He was tall and imposing, a dark silhouette against the grey sky. His name was Furrow, and he stood motionless, his presence a silent question mark. He was dressed in a suit that had seen better days, the fabric worn thin, the cut outdated. Mud-caked farm boots peeked out from beneath the trousers, a stark contrast to the somber occasion. As the last of the mourners dispersed, melting back into the village like shadows, Serene remained, rooted to the spot. The rain intensified, plastering her hair to her face. She felt utterly alone, adrift in a sea of grief. Then she heard the crunch of gravel behind her. Turning, she saw Furrow approaching. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried gait, his eyes, the color of rich soil, fixed on her. Miss Serene, isn't it? His voice was deep and resonant, a burly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the air. I'm Furrow. I own a small farm just outside the village. He paused. His gaze softening with genuine sympathy. My sincere condolences for your loss. Liam was a good man. The words were simple, but the sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Serene managed a weak nod, her throat tight with emotion. Thank you, Mr. Furrow. Serene noticed something incongruous. His hands. They were large, calloused no doubt, but impeccably clean. the nails neatly trimmed. He stood there for a moment, his presence a strange comfort in her desolation. The incongruity of his appearance, the shabby suit, the polished hands, intrigued her. What was this man doing here? Why did he seem so genuinely affected by Liam's death? He was fixing a loose shingle, she said, her voice barely a whisper. A freak accident. He just fell. The image flashed in her mind, sharp and brutal, and she squeezed her eyes shut. Furrow remained silent, allowing her grief to fill the space between them. Then he spoke again, his voice gentle. Life can be cruel, Miss Cerene. It deals blows that seem impossible to bear. He paused, his gaze drifting towards the freshly turned earth. But even in the darkest soil, new life can take root. He didn't elaborate, but his words resonated with a strange, unexpected hope. Cerene looked at him, rarely looked at him, for the first time. He was an enigma, this farmer with a withered face and surprisingly elegant hands. Thank you, she said again, her voice a little stronger this time. That means a lot. He inclined his head, a gesture of respect. Take care of yourself, Miss Cerene. The village is here for you if you need anything. And with that, he turned and walked back towards the yew tree, disappearing into the gathering gloom. Cerene watched him, a flicker of curiosity igniting in the depths of her grief. The thought of returning to the sterile, predictable world of spreadsheets and city skyscrapers felt like a betrayal. Leaving Liam here, all alone beneath the damp earth of Lower Paddleton, was unthinkable. So Cerene found herself drawn back to the churchyard a few times that same week, the worn path a familiar echo of her grief. One day dawned grey and listless, much like her own spirit. She stood before Liam's grave, the simple headstone still starkly new against the ancient, lichen-covered stones surrounding it. The scent of damp earth and fading lilies hung heavy in the air. Liam, she whispered, her voice delicate above the rustling leaves. I don't know what to do. Everyone says I should move on, go back to my old life. But how can I leave you here? What would you want me to do? She closed her eyes, searching for a sign, a whisper of guidance from the void. But there was only silence, broken only by a familiar crunch of gravel. Turning, she saw Furrow approaching, this time dressed in more appropriate attire for a farmer. Worn overalls, a faded flannel shirt, and his ever-present muddy boots. He carried a dented thermos flask in his hand. "Miss Cerene," he said, softer than before. "I thought I might find you here." She managed a weak smile. "Mr. Furrow, it seems this place is becoming a habit." He nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "It's a place for reflection, for remembering." He paused, then offered the flask. "I brewed some coffee. A bit strong, perhaps, but it warms the soul." Cerene hesitated. "Thank you, but I couldn't." The thought of accepting anything from him felt strangely intimate, a violation of her grief. He didn't press, simply held the flask out, a silent invitation. "As you wish." He took a sip himself, his gaze fixed on the horizon. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle breeze whispering through the trees. Then Cerene spoke, her voice true and vulnerable. "What is love, Mr. Furrow? What does it mean when it's just gone?" Furrow lowered the flask, his brow furrowed in thought. Love is a seed, Miss Cerene, planted deep within the heart. It grows, blossoms, brings joy and nourishment. But even when the flower fades, the roots remain. They nourish the soil, preparing it for new growth. "But what if I don't want new growth?" she asked, her voice laced with pain. "What if I just want the flower back?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, knowing sadness. "Sometimes we don't get to choose, Miss Cerene. Life chooses for us. All we can do is tend the soil and hope for the best." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "We all have someone we miss, someone we wish we could bring back." He didn't elaborate, didn't say who he was there to visit, leaving Cerene to wonder about the shadows in his past. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken grief and shared understanding. Finally, Cerene reached out, her fingers brushing against his, as she took the flask. "Just a sip," she said, her voice trembling. She brought the flask to her lips and took a tentative sip. The coffee was indeed strong, but beneath the bitter brew was a fiery kick of whiskey, potent and unexpected. She coughed, the burning sensation catching in her throat. Furrow chuckled softly, a warm, comforting sound. He reached out, placing a large, calloused hand gently on her exposed shoulder. "Easy now. It's got a bit of a bite." The touch was fleeting, innocent, but it sent a jolt through her. Whether it was the whiskey, the coffee, or the unexpected warmth of Furrow's hand, she couldn't say. All she knew was that a flicker of something other than grief stirred within her. A fragile warmth, a hesitant spark of hope. The warmth of Furrow's hand lingered on Cerene's shoulder long after he had gone. As she walked back to her small cottage, the image of his weathered face and kind eyes kept intruding on her thoughts. It was nice, she admitted to herself, to feel something other than the suffocating weight of grief. It was nice to be around someone who seemed to understand, who didn't offer platitudes of empty reassurances. The next day at work, the rhythmic clang of metal and the smell of welding fumes seemed strangely muted, distant. Cerene found herself going through the motions, her mind preoccupied with the enigmatic farmer. She hadn't been this distracted since Liam. During her lunch break, she sought out Darcy Ann, her only real friend in Lower Paddleton. Darcy Ann was a stout, cheerful woman with a cascade of fiery red hair and a penchant for gossip. If anyone knew the story of Furrow, it would be her. "Darcy Ann," Cerene began hesitantly, "do you know much about Furrow?" Darcy Ann's eyes widened with curiosity. "Furrow? You mean the farmer who lives out on the old Blackwood place? What's got you interested in him?" Cerene shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Just curious. I met him at the churchyard. He seemed nice." Darcy Ann leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Nice, is he? Well, that's not what most folks around here would say." "Why? What's wrong with him?" Cerene asked, her curiosity piqued. Darcy Ann hesitated, chewing on her lip. Well, there's not much known, mind you. He keeps to himself mostly. Lives out on the farm all alone. Grows a bit of this and that. Sells it at the market sometimes. But what? Cerene pressed. Well, he disappeared a few years back. Just vanished. Nobody knew where he went. Not a word. Then, just as suddenly, he reappeared. Just as quiet as ever. Never said a word about where he'd been. Disappeared, Cerene frowned. For how long? Oh, a good few years. 3, maybe 4. Enough time for folk to start whispering. Some say he went off to make his fortune. Others say he was mixed up in something bad. Nobody really knows. Darcy Ann leaned back, her expression thoughtful. The Blackwood place has always been a bit strange, if you ask me. Old stories, you know. Bad luck, strange happenings, and Furrow, well, he just adds to the mystery. So, he's not well liked? Cerene asked, a knot forming in her stomach. Darcy Ann shrugged. Not exactly disliked, but distrusted maybe. People are wary of what they don't understand. He keeps to himself, and that makes folks suspicious. Cerene fell silent, absorbing the information. A missing man, whispered rumors, a shadowy past. It certainly added another layer to the enigma of Furrow. But despite the village's negative views, Cerene found herself drawn to him even more. Perhaps it was the shared grief, or perhaps it was the thrill of the unknown. Whatever it was, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Furrow than met the eye. The information Darcy Ann shared cast a long shadow over Cerene's budding curiosity. The whispers of a mysterious past, the years of unexplained absence, the general distrust of the villagers. It was enough to make her question her instincts. Was she being foolish, drawn to a man with a hidden life? Was she simply projecting her grief onto someone who offered a brief respite from the pain? The thought of confronting Furrow, of demanding answers he might not want to give, filled her with anxiety. It was easier, she reasoned, to simply avoid him. So she began to change her routine. She still visited Liam's grave, but she timed her visits carefully, avoiding the hours when she was most likely to encounter Furrow. If she saw him approaching the churchyard, she would turn and walk in the opposite direction. her heart pounding in her chest. If she arrived to find him already there, she would offer a curt nod and leave, pretending she had forgotten something important. At first, there was a sense of relief. She had made the right decision, she told herself. She was protecting herself from potential heartache, from getting entangled in a life that was clearly more complicated than she could handle. She focused on her work, on balancing the books, on finding a sense of normalcy in the mundane. But as the days turned into weeks, a strange emptiness began to creep into her life. The relief faded, replaced by a persistent ache. She found herself scanning the horizon whenever she walked through the village, her eyes searching for a glimpse of his tall, imposing figure. She would linger a little longer at the market, hoping to catch a glimpse of him selling his produce. She would even find herself subconsciously gravitating towards the Blackwood farm on her afternoon walks, drawn by an invisible force. Furrow, however, remained elusive. He seemed to have vanished from her life as completely as he had vanished from the village years ago. She no longer saw him at the churchyard, no longer caught fleeting glimpses of him in the village. It was as if he had sensed her withdrawal and retreated back into his solitary existence. And that, she realized, was what bothered her the most. She missed him. She missed his quiet presence, his gentle words, his knowing eyes. She missed the unexpected warmth of his touch, a shared silence that had felt so comforting. She missed the feeling of being seen, of being understood. She had tried to protect herself to avoid getting hurt, but in doing so, she had also denied herself the possibility of something more. And now, as she walked through the village, the rain, a constant, mournful drizzle, she couldn't help but wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Cerene tried to settle back into the rhythm of her life, but the memory of Furrow and the nagging sense of missed opportunity continued to haunt her. Then came a bright, unexpectedly sunny Saturday, and the lure of the farmers' markets proved too strong to resist. She needed fresh vegetables, she told herself, and a bit of sunshine would do her good. But deep down, she knew that she was hoping, against her better judgment, for a glimpse of Furrow. As she strolled through the bustling market, the air filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and ripe fruit, she spotted him. He was standing near one of the farmer's stalls, a large wooden crate at his feet. He was dressed in his usual farm attire, his weathered face etched with lines that spoke of hard work and long days. He lifted the crate with surprising ease and set it down behind the stall, the farmer nodding his approval. Then Cerene watched as Furrow and the farmer engaged in a low-voiced conversation, their expressions serious. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see the intensity in their gestures, the way they leaned in close, as if sharing a secret. Then the farmer extended his hand, and Furrow shook it firmly. A final exchange of words was made, something about a horse's fawn being awaited for as payment to Furrow. And then Furrow turned to leave. A jolt of fear shot through Cerene. The secrets of conversation, the mention of a horse's fawn as payment. It all sounded so clandestine, so unsettling. What was Furrow involved in? Was Darcy-Ann right about him being mixed up in something bad? Panic welled up inside her. She couldn't be seen, not now. She ducked behind a large display of pumpkins, her heart pounding. She peeked through the gaps between the gourds, watching Furrow as he disappeared into the crowd. Cerene? Cerene, is that you? Darcy-Ann's booming voice cut through the air, shattering Cerene's carefully constructed wall of anonymity. What in the world are you doing hiding behind the pumpkins? Darcy-Ann planted herself firmly in front of Cerene, her hands on her hips, her red hair practically glowing in the sunlight. Cerene froze, caught like a deer in headlights. She couldn't tell Darcy-Ann that she was spying on Furrow, that she was consumed by a mixture of fear and fascination. It would sound ridiculous, obsessive. Oh, hi, Darcy-Ann, she stammered, trying to sound casual. I was just admiring the pumpkins. Darcy-Ann raised a skeptical eyebrow. Admiring the pumpkins? You look like you were trying to disappear into them. What's going on? Cerene knew she couldn't tell Darcy-Ann the truth. Not yet, anyhow. Nothing, she said, quickly grabbing Darcy-Ann's arm. I need to talk to you. Can we go somewhere quieter? Darcy-Ann, ever the gossip, seemed intrigued. Well, all right then, but you're going to have to tell me what that was all about. She cast a curious glance back towards the market stalls, where Furrow had disappeared. Cerene pulled Darcy-Ann away from the market, away from the possibility of being seen by Furrow. She knew she was acting irrationally, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of uncovering something dark and dangerous. Cerene managed a weak smile, pulling Darcy Ann further away from the bustling farmer's market. "Let's go to my cottage," she suggested, her voice laced with a forced cheerfulness. "I'll make you some pumpkin soup. It's the perfect thing for a sunny autumn day. And we can just talk. Girl things." Darcy Ann, always up for a good gossip session, readily agreed. "Pumpkin soup sounds lovely, dear. And it's been ages since we had a proper catch-up." She still looked at Cerene with suspicion, but the promise of food and conversation seemed to appease her. As they walked through the village, Cerene struggled to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Her mind was racing, replaying the scene at the market, the hushed conversation, the unsettling payment. She needed to confide in someone, but she wasn't sure if Darcy Ann was the right person. Darcy Ann was a wonderful friend, but she also had a tendency to exaggerate and embellish stories, and Cerene didn't want to fuel the village's already negative perception of Furrow. Back at the cottage, Cerene busied herself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and stirring the simmering soup. The familiar routine was soothing, a welcome distraction from her troubled thoughts. Darcy Ann settled into a comfortable armchair, her eyes scanning the cozy cottage, taking in every detail. As the aroma of pumpkin and spices filled the air, the tension between them began to ease. They talked about trivial things, the latest gossip from the village, the upcoming harvest festival, the new hairstyle of the vicar's wife. Cerene steered clear of any mention of Furrow, careful to keep the conversation light and innocuous. Eventually, as they sat at the table, savouring the warm soup, Darcy Ann's curiosity got the better of her. "So," she said, her eyes narrowed slightly, "you never did tell me what you were doing hiding behind those pumpkins. You looked like you'd seen a ghost." Cerene hesitated, then decided to change the subject completely. "You knew Liam, didn't you?" she asked, hoping to divert Darcy Ann's attention. Darcy Ann's face softened. "Oh yes, I knew Liam. We went to primary school together, before his family moved to the big city. Such a lovely boy. Quiet, but always kind. I was so sorry to hear about what happened." Cerene's heart ached at the mention of Liam. "It's still so hard to believe he's gone," she said. "Sometimes I feel like he's just away on a trip and he'll be back any day now." I can only imagine, Darcy Ann said sympathetically. He was a lucky man to have you, you know. Giving up your city life to come here for him. That's true love. Cerene smiled sadly. I was from the big city, yes. Funny, isn't it? I met Liam at one of my work-sponsored opera trips. I knew nothing about the opera, and nor did I want to learn. But Liam was so passionate about it. He could talk for hours about the music, the history. I loved that about him. He could find beauty in the most unexpected places. And I loved that he loved it so much. He seemed very sophisticated, Darcy Ann offered. He was, Cerene agreed. He took me on many trips to France, Spain, Italy. He was very well travelled and loved seeing new things. I used to be afraid of flying. Darcy Ann smiled. You were very lucky to find each other. Cerene nodded, lost in her memories of Liam. For a brief moment, the pain of her loss seemed to ease, replaced by a bittersweet nostalgia. But the memory of Furrow and the unsettling scene at the market lingered in the back of her mind, a dark cloud threatening to overshadow the warmth of the moment. The sudden, sharp knocking echoed through the small cottage, jolting both women from their reverie. Cerene jumped, her heart pounding in her chest. Darcy Ann, ever the curious one, eagerly craned her neck, trying to catch a glimpse of whoever was at the door. Cerene took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. Who could that be? She muttered, more to herself than to Darcy Ann. She walked to the door, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the knob. As she opened it, she was met with the sight of Furrow standing on her doorstep. He was carrying a large basket overflowing with mixed vegetables, plump tomatoes, vibrant bell peppers, dark leafy greens, and a handful of freshly picked herbs. He stood there in silence for a moment, his gaze meeting hers, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke, his voice low and resonant. Miss Cerene, he said, his eyes flicking briefly towards Darcy Ann, who was practically vibrating with curiosity. I saw you at the market earlier. You left empty-handed, and I thought you might appreciate these. He held out the basket, his eyes fixed on hers. Cerene stared back, speechless. She was caught between a desire to accept his gift and a fear of getting further entangled in his mysterious life. Darcy Ann, however, had no such reservations. "Well, isn't that kind of you, Mr. Furrow?" she chirped, stepping forward to get a better look. "These look lovely. Fresh from your garden, I presume?" Furrow nodded, his gaze shifting to Darcy Ann. "Yes, ma'am. I grow them myself." Cerene finally found her words. "That's very kind of you." She reached out and took the basket, the weight of it surprisingly comforting in her hands. The vegetables smelled fresh and earthy, a reminder of the simple beauty of the natural world. "You're welcome, Miss Cerene," Furrow said, his gaze returning to hers. "I hope you enjoy them." He paused for a moment, then added almost as an afterthought, "Perhaps I'll see you at the churchyard sometime." He didn't wait for a response, simply turned and walked away, disappearing down the path towards the village. Cerene stood there, clutching the basket of vegetables. What was Furrow doing? Was this a simple act of kindness, or was there something more to it? And what did he mean by, "Perhaps I'll see you at the churchyard sometime"? Was he trying to lure her back into his orbit? Darcy Ann, meanwhile, was buzzing with excitement. "Well, isn't he just a charmer?" she said, clapping her hands together. "And so thoughtful. You've clearly made an impression on him, Cerene." Cerene sighed, her head spinning. She had hoped to keep her distance from Furrow, but he had just brought himself right to her doorstep, literally. And with Darcy Ann as a witness, there was no way she could deny that there was something between them, or at least something that Furrow seemed to be pursuing. A few days later, Cerene found herself drawn back to the churchyard. The vegetables Furrow had given her were delicious, and the act of cooking them had brought a small measure of comfort to her days. But more than that, she couldn't shake the memory of his visit. The way he had looked at her, the unspoken invitation in his eyes. She told herself she was going to visit Liam, to tend to his grave and offer a silent prayer. But deep down, she knew what she was hoping for, perhaps foolishly: to see Furrow again. As she approached Liam's headstone, she saw him. He was standing near the yew tree, his figure a familiar silhouette against the grey sky. He was looking at Liam's headstone. Cerene hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and walked towards him. "Mr. Furrow," she said, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. He turned, his eyes lighting up slightly when he saw her. "Miss Cerene," he said, his voice soft. "I was hoping I might see you here. I wanted to say thank you again for the vegetables," she said, her cheeks flushing slightly. "They were wonderful." "You're very welcome," he said, his gaze lingering on hers. "I'm glad you enjoyed them." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle breeze whispering through the trees. The air was thick with unspoken emotions, with a mixture of longing and hesitation. "It's a beautiful place," Cerene said, breaking the silence, her gaze drifting towards the ancient gravestones. "Peaceful." "It is," Furrow agreed. "A good place to remember those we've lost." They talked about Liam, about his kindness, his passion for opera, his quiet strength. They talked about grief, about the pain of loss, about the struggle to move on. And as they spoke, Cerene felt a connection growing between them, a shared understanding that transcended words. As they stood side by side, their hands hanging at their sides, their fingers brushed. It was an accident, a fleeting touch, but it sent a jolt of electricity through Cerene's body. Without hesitation, Furrow reached out and gently took her hand. He didn't look at her, didn't say a word, simply held her hand in his touch warm and firm. Cerene didn't pull away. The contact felt natural, right. It was as if their hands were meant to be together, as if they had been searching for each other for a long time. They stood like that for the remainder of their visit, their hands clasped tightly together, their silence filled with unspoken emotions. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, connected by a simple touch. They only spoke when it was time to leave, when the sky began to darken and the air grew cold. Furrow released her hand, his eyes meeting hers, his expression filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I should be going," he said, his voice low. "The animals need feeding." "Yes," she said. "I should go too." They walked towards the gate together, their footsteps echoing softly in the gathering gloom. At the gate they paused, their eyes meeting one last time. "Good night, Miss Cerene," Furrow said, his voice filled with warmth. "Good night, Mr. Furrow," she replied. They turned and walked in opposite directions towards their respective homes. But as Cerene walked, she couldn't stop thinking about the warmth of Furrow's hand in hers, the unspoken connection between them. She knew that something had changed, that they had crossed a threshold, and she couldn't help but wonder where this new path would lead them. The days that followed were filled with a quiet anticipation. Cerene found herself drawn to the churchyard more and more often, not just to visit Liam, but to see Furrow. Their meetings became a comforting ritual, a shared space where they could be themselves, where they could grieve, and where they could tentatively explore the budding connection between them. The hand-holding continued, a silent affirmation of their growing closeness. Soon they progressed to gentle embraces, arms wrapped around each other, finding solace and comfort in the warmth of their bodies. They would share small snacks, a piece of fruit, a homemade cookie, simple gestures of affection that spoke volumes. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the yew tree, sharing a bag of freshly baked scones, Furrow turned to Cerene, his eyes filled with a gentle warmth. "Miss Cerene," he said, "I was wondering, would you ever consider coming to my farm? I'd like to cook you a meal." Serene's heart skipped a beat. The invitation was unexpected, a significant step forward in their relationship. She felt a thrill of excitement, a longing to see his farm, to experience his world. But at the same time, a wave of guilt washed over her. Liam had only just passed. Was it right for her to be considering such an invitation? Was she betraying his memory by even entertaining the thought of a romantic dinner with another man? "Mr. Furrow," she said, her voice hesitant. I don't know. It feels inappropriate. Liam." Furrow reached out and gently took her hand, his touch reassuring. "I understand," he said. "But I don't want you to feel pressured. I simply want to share something with you, to show you a part of my life. You don't have to say yes." Cerene looked at him, her eyes searching his. She saw sincerity, kindness, and a genuine desire to connect. She knew that accepting his invitation would be a risk, a step into the unknown. But she also knew that she couldn't keep living in the shadow of her grief forever. She needed to move forward, to embrace the possibility of happiness, even if it felt like a betrayal. After a long moment of contemplation, she spoke. "Okay," she said. "I'll come, but not yet. I need a little more time." Furrow smiled, his eyes lighting up. "Of course," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "Whenever you're ready, there's no rush." Cerene returned his smile, a mixture of excitement and trepidation swirling within her. She had accepted his invitation, and she knew that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The days leading up to her visit to Furrow's farm were a tumultuous mix of anticipation and guilt. Cerene found herself caught in a constant battle between her longing for connection and her fear of betraying Liam's memory. Every moment of happiness felt tainted by a shadow of remorse. Every smile followed by a pang of sadness. She would visit Liam's grave, pouring out her heart, seeking his forgiveness. She would tell him about Furrow, about his kindness, his gentle touch, the way he made her feel seen and understood. She would ask Liam if it was okay, if he would want her to move on, to find happiness again. But the only response was the silent rustling of leaves and the mournful whisper of the wind. At work, Darcy Ann's curiosity about Furrow only intensified. She noticed Cerene's lighter mood, the subtle glow in her eyes, and couldn't resist prying. "So," she would say, her eyes narrowed with suspicion, "what's been going on with you and Mr. Furrow? I've seen you two talking at the market, and the visit to your cottage. That wasn't just a friendly gesture, was it?" Cerene would deflect, offering vague answers and feigning surprise. "Oh, it was nothing, Darcy Ann," she would say, trying to sound casual. "He was just being neighborly. The vegetables were lovely, though." She hated lying to Darcy Ann, but she wasn't ready to share the truth. Not yet. She needed to figure out her own feelings first, to decide if this relationship with Furrow was something real, something worth pursuing. As the day of her visit drew closer, Cerene's nervousness grew. She spent hours agonizing over what to wear, what to say, how to act. She wanted to make a good impression on Furrow, to show him that she was open to the possibility of something more. But she also wanted to honor Liam's memory, to show Furrow that she would never forget him, that he would always be a part of her life. Finally, she decided that she needed a new dress. something that was both elegant and practical, something that would make her feel confident and beautiful. She ventured into a small boutique in a neighboring village, a place she had never been before. As she browsed through the racks, her eyes fell on a dress that seemed to call to her. It was an airy summer dress, made of soft, flowing fabric in a delicate floral pattern. It was simple, yet elegant, and it seemed to perfectly capture the lightness and joy that she had been missing in her life. She tried it on, and as she looked at herself in the mirror, she felt a flicker of hope. The dress fit her perfectly, accentuating her figure and bringing out the color in her eyes. It was the perfect dress, she thought. The perfect dress to wear to Furrow's farm. She knew that Furrow would greatly appreciate her wearing this dress. She bought the dress, her heart filled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. As she walked out of the boutique, the sun shining warmly on her face, she couldn't help but wonder what awaited her at Furrow's farm, and what the future held for her in this mysterious, kind-hearted man. As Cerene approached Furrow's farm, her nerves began to rattle. The farm was nestled in a valley, surrounded by rolling hills and lush green fields. It was a picturesque scene, straight out of a postcard. As she got closer, she could see Furrow standing in the doorway of the farmhouse, waiting for her. He was wearing a simple linen shirt and worn trousers, his sleeves rolled up to reveal his strong forearms. When he saw her, his eyes widened in surprise, and he almost dropped the basket he was holding. "Miss Cerene," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You look beautiful." He ushered her inside, and Cerene stepped into a cozy, rustic kitchen. The air was filled with the aroma of roasting vegetables and herbs. A wooden table was set for two, with candles flickering softly, casting a warm glow on the room. They sat down to eat, and the conversation flowed easily. Furrow was a gracious host, sharing stories about his life on the farm, about the animals he cared for, the crops he grew. He told her about how he used to be a classical music prodigy, a pianist who had toured the world, playing in the most prestigious concert halls. But he had chosen to retire young, to return to the farm he was born on. He missed it terribly when he was touring. He mentioned he had a small stint back in the music world, but returned to farming yet again after realizing he missed the simple life. Cerene was captivated by his story. She shared things about herself that finally didn't include Liam. She talked about her childhood, her dreams, her fears. She laughed, she cried, and she felt a connection with Furrow that she had never felt with anyone before. He felt familiar. As the evening drew to a close, they stood by the door, saying goodbye. Furrow reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands. Their eyes met, and a spark of desire ignited between them. He leaned in and kissed her. A slow, tender kiss that sent shivers down her spine. Cerene kissed him back, her longing for him intensifying with each passing moment. She wanted him. She needed him. She yearned for him. But Furrow, perhaps not realizing the depth of her desire, pulled away, a gentle smile on his face. "I think the evening has ended well," he said softly. "I'll take you home." He walked her out to his van, the night air cool against her skin. He drove her home, the silence between them filled with unspoken emotions. At her doorstep, he kissed her again, a passionate kiss that left her breathless. "Good night again, Cerene," he said, his voice husky with desire. "Good night, Furrow," she replied. She watched as he drove away, her mind racing. She couldn't believe that he had left, that he hadn't realized how much she wanted him. She stepped inside her cottage, overwhelmed by a wave of emotions. Then suddenly the door swung open, and Furrow rushed in. He didn't say a word, simply pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a raw, unrestrained passion. They fell to the floor, their bodies entwined, their desire for each other finally unleashed. His hands explored her curves, his lips tracing a fiery path down her neck. She gasped, her body arching towards him, craving his touch. He shed her dress, the soft fabric falling away. He gazed at her, his eyes filled with adoration. Their bodies merging as one. Their lovemaking was passionate, tender. It was a release of pent-up emotions, a celebration of their connection, a surrender to their deepest desires. Her body reaching its peak of ecstasy. Finally, they collapsed in each other's arms, their bodies slick with sweat, their hearts pounding in unison. They lay there for a long time, their silence filled with a profound sense of peace and contentment. Cerene had finally found what she had been searching for. She had found love. She had found passion. She had found a new beginning. Furrow slipped away in the middle of the night. The rumble of his van engine, a quiet intrusion in the otherwise silent village. Cerene stirred slightly as she heard him leave. A pang of disappointment mixed with a lingering sense of satisfaction. She snuggled deeper into the warmth of the blankets, the scent of him still clinging to her skin, and drifted back to sleep, a soft smile playing on her lips. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of happiness and discovery. Cerene and Furrow were inseparable, exploring the countryside together, laughing, sharing stories, and simply enjoying each other's company. Cerene felt alive again, as if she had been awakened from a long slumber. They went on picnics by the river, hiked through the rolling hills, and danced under the stars in Furrow's barn. Cerene learned about farming, helping Furrow tend to his crops and care for his animals. She discovered a hidden talent for gardening, her touch bringing life to even the most barren soil. Furrow, in turn, learned about Cerene's passion for numbers, her sharp wit, and her hidden artistic talents. He encouraged her to paint, to draw, to express herself in ways she had never thought possible. He saw her, truly saw her, for who she was, and he loved her for it. But their happiness came at a price. The villagers of Lower Paddleton were not welcoming of their relationship. They whispered behind their backs, casting disapproving glances and making snide remarks. Cerene was branded a heartless widow, accused of disrespecting Liam's memory by moving on so quickly. She hasn't even waited a year, they would say, shaking their heads in disapproval. Such a disgrace. Furrow, too, was the target of their scorn. They accused him of taking advantage of a much younger woman, of preying on her vulnerability. He's always been a bit of an oddball, they would say, and now he's gone and snared himself a naive little city girl. The judgmental stares and whispered insults stung, but Cerene and Furrow refused to let the negativity dim their happiness. They knew that what they had was real, that their love was genuine. They wouldn't let the opinions of others dictate their lives. They held their heads high, ignoring the whispers and the stares. They continued to go about their lives, hand in hand, their love a beacon of light in the face of disapproval. They attended village events, went to the market, and even volunteered at the local church, determined to show the villagers that they were not ashamed of their relationship. But the negativity persisted, creating a constant undercurrent of tension. Cerene began to feel isolated, ostracized by the community she had once hoped to call home. She started to question whether their happiness was worth the price of social isolation. The promise of a night at Furrow's farm always filled Cerene with a sense of anticipation. The rustic charm of the farmhouse, the warmth of Furrow's embrace, and the freedom to be herself, far away from the judgmental eyes of the villagers, made it her sanctuary. That night was no different. They cooked a delicious meal together, laughing and teasing each other as they chopped vegetables and stirred the simmering pot. After dinner, they settled into bed, the soft glow of the moonlight streaming through the window. They made love, their bodies moving together in a familiar rhythm, their passion undiminished. Later, as they lay entwined, their bodies still flushed with pleasure, Cerene offered to fetch them some water. She slipped out of bed, the cool night air sending shivers down her spine. Naked, she padded into the kitchen, her bare feet padding softly on the wooden floor. She rummaged through the cupboards, searching for a suitable jug. Her eyes scanned the shelves, filled with mismatched dishes and forgotten treasures. In one of the highest cupboards, tucked away in the back, she spotted a thick manila envelope. Curiosity piqued. She reached for it, her fingers brushing against the rough paper. She hesitated for a moment, a sense of unease settling over her. But the temptation was too strong to resist. She pulled the envelope down, her heart racing still. She opened it carefully, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside, she found a stack of handwritten letters, their ink faded and worn. She skimmed through them, her brow furrowing in concentration and confusion. Then she came across a series of photographs, slightly faded, but the images were clear. The first few photos showed Furrow and Liam in the big city, standing in front of famous landmarks, smiling and laughing. They looked happy, carefree, like old friends enjoying each other's company. Cerene's breath caught in her throat. What was Liam doing with Furrow in the big city? She flipped through the photos. Then she saw it. A photo of Furrow and Liam kissing, standing in front of the Grand Opera House, their bodies pressed close together. The envelope slipped from her grasp, the letters and photos scattering across the floor. Cerene gasped, her mind reeling. Liam and Furrow, lovers. It was impossible. It couldn't be true. Cerene, Furrow's voice startled her, cutting through her shock from the bedroom. What are you doing there? Panic surged through her. She quickly gathered the letters and photos, stuffing them back into the envelope. She shoved the envelope back into the cupboard, slamming the door shut. She grabbed 2 glasses and filled them with water, her hands shaking so badly that she spilled some on the floor. She turned and walked back to the bedroom, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She felt more naked than ever before. What took you so long? Furrow asked, his voice laced with concern. Cerene forced a smile, trying to appear normal. Just couldn't find a jug, she said, her voice trembling slightly. She handed him a glass of water and climbed back into bed. She couldn't sleep. The images of Liam and Furrow kissing haunted her, filling her with confusion and dread. She lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts spiraling out of control. Who was Furrow? What was his relationship with Liam? And why had he never told her about it? She felt betrayed, deceived, and most of all, scared. She didn't truly know the man lying beside her. As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, Furrow stirred, reaching for her. He pulled her close, his lips finding hers in a gentle kiss. She tensed, her body recoiling at his touch, but she couldn't bring herself to push him away. Her body detached. Afterward, she made an excuse to leave, claiming she had an emergency appointment at work. Furrow looked at her, his eyes filled with suspicion. Are you all right? He asked. You seem different. I'm fine, she said, forcing a smile. Just tired. He kissed her goodbye, but his eyes lingered on her, his gaze searching. Cerene turned and fled, desperate to escape the farm, desperate to escape Furrow. She needed answers, but she was terrified of what she might find. The days that followed were filled with the growing sense of dread and paranoia. Cerene found herself consumed by the images she had seen in Furrow's kitchen. The letters, The photos, the kiss. She replayed them over and over in her head, trying to make sense of it all, but the pieces simply wouldn't fit. She avoided Furrow at all costs, making excuses to avoid his calls, his visits, his presence. She told him she was busy with work, that she needed time to herself, that she wasn't feeling well. She knew he was suspicious, that he had sensed something was wrong, but she couldn't bring herself to confront him. She was too scared, too confused, too hurt. She also avoided the churchyard, unable to face Liam's grave, unable to reconcile the image of the man she had loved with the man in those photographs. She felt like she was living a lie, that her entire relationship with Liam had been based on a foundation of deceit. She longed to confide in someone, to share her burden with a trusted friend, but she couldn't turn to the villagers for help. They already despised her for moving on so quickly, for daring to find happiness after Liam's death. They would relish the opportunity to judge her, to condemn her, to revel in her misery. One day, as she was working late, Darcy Ann stopped by her desk, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "So," she said, her voice dripping with insinuation, "how's your love life with Mr. Furrow going? I haven't seen you two lovebirds around lately." Cerene cringed, her stomach churning. She hated lying to Darcy Ann, but she couldn't reveal the truth. Not yet. "It's fine," she said, forcing a smile. "We're just taking things slow." Darcy Ann raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Taking things slow? Is that what you call it? Last I saw, you two were practically glued together." She paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "You know, Furrow used to be my musical teacher when I was in primary school." Cerene froze, her blood turning to ice. What? Furrow had been Darcy Ann's musical teacher. The implications of that statement were sickening. She felt a wave of nausea rising in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked. Darcy Ann shrugged. "Oh, it was nothing much. He just gave us piano lessons once a week. He was very talented, very patient, but he left after a few years. Said he was going to the big city." Serene's mind was reeling. Furrow had been a primary school teacher, and he had known Darcy Ann since she was a child. How old was he really? "Did he teach you privately or at school?" the lump in her throat growing exponentially. Privately, he was very cheap as a tutor because it was just for a little extra pocket money. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture they had formed was terrifying. She felt like she was trapped in a nightmare, surrounded by lies and secrets. She swallowed hard, trying to control her rising panic. I have to go, she said, grabbing her purse and rushing out the office. She stumbled through the streets, her body trembling. She needed to get away, to escape the suffocating weight of Furrow's lies. She felt physically sick, disgusted by the man she had thought she loved. She realized with a jolt that she couldn't stay in Lower Paddleton. She couldn't live in a village where everyone knew her, where everyone whispered behind her back, where everyone was connected to Furrow in some twisted way. She had to leave, to start over, to escape the shadow of her past. Cerene stumbled through the door of her cottage, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of her discovery. She burst into the small living room, her breath coming in ragged gasps. And then she saw him. Furrow stood there in the center of her living room, his face etched with a mixture of sadness and resolve. He was holding a framed photograph, a picture of Cerene and Liam, taken on a sunny day in the village, their smiles bright and carefree. It was a photo that had sat proudly on her mantelpiece, a cherished reminder of their love. He didn't look up at her. He didn't acknowledge her presence. He simply stood there, his gaze fixed on the photograph, his body rigid with tension. Cerene stood there frozen in the doorway, her mind reeling. She had forgotten that she had given Furrow a spare key to her cottage, a gesture of trust that now felt like a profound betrayal. He said that he had required access to drop off fresh veg and meat while Cerene was at work. But now, the idea disgusted her with the thought of him lurking there. She stood there in abject shock. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotions, with years of lies and secrets. Finally, Furrow spoke, a murmur lost in the small room. I used to love him, he said, his words directed at the photograph, not at her. The words shattered the last vestiges of Cerene's composure. She exploded, her voice raw with anger and pain. What the hell is going on? Furrow finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers, his expression filled with a deep, haunting sadness. "It's a long story," he said, his voice weary. "But you deserve to know the truth." He began to speak, his words tumbling out in a rush, a torrent of confessions that Cerene struggled to comprehend. He told her about his life, about his passion for music, about his decision to leave the big city and return to the farm. Then, many years later, he spoke about when he came back from retirement to go and play the piano at the opera, where he met Liam. Cerene listened in stunned silence, her mind struggling to process the information. She couldn't reconcile the images of the gentle, kind-hearted farmer she had come to love with the man who was now confessing to a secret past, a hidden life. But as Furrow spoke, she realized that he was telling the truth. His pain was palpable. His remorse was genuine. He had been living a lie, but he had never intended to hurt her. As he spoke about his time teaching music, she thought, "But you had met Liam as a child," she shouted, her voice laced with accusation, as the information Darcy Ann had shared crashed over her. "You were his music teacher." Furrow scoffed at the accusation, his expression incredulous. "I was purely his teacher at the time," he said, his voice firm. "I never expected to meet Liam again, not as an adult, not in the big city." Cerene stared at him, her mind still reeling. She didn't know what to believe, what to think. She had so many questions, so many doubts, so many fears. But one thing was clear. Her life would never be the same again. As Furrow spoke, his voice filled with a raw vulnerability, he began to slowly edge towards Cerene, his eyes pleading for understanding. He recounted his time in the big city, the whirlwind romance with Liam, the intensity of their love, and the devastating pain of their breakup. "He broke my heart, Cerene," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "He left me without a word, without an explanation. I was lost, shattered." He explained that he had left the big city, unable to bear the constant reminders of Liam's betrayal. He had returned to the farm, seeking solace in the familiar rhythms of nature, trying to forget the man who had stolen his heart. But then, soon after, he had heard that Liam had moved back to the village as well, but with his fiancée, Cerene. He did his best to never bump into them, and it worked, as the size of the village permitted to be selective of where one went. He never saw either of them. Then he learnt of Liam's passing and realized he was still very much in love with him. The idea of him passing without them settling things haunted him deeply. He explained that when he first saw Cerene at the funeral, he wanted to be close to Liam again. He then saw Cerene and wanted to experience the parts of Liam she had left inside of her. They both started crying, the tears streaming down their faces, a mixture of grief, pain, and confusion. Cerene was furious, feeling used and betrayed. But she couldn't help but feel sorry for Furrow, for the years of heartache and loneliness he had endured. She saw the depth of his love for Liam, the intensity of his pain, and she realized that he had been just as much a victim of circumstance as she had. As they stood there, bathed in the soft glow of the evening light, they reached for each other, their hands trembling, their hearts aching. They embraced, their bodies pressed close together, seeking comfort and solace in each other's arms. And then they kissed. A kiss filled with tears, with grief, with a desperate longing for connection. It was a kiss that transcended their individual pain, a kiss that acknowledged their shared loss, their shared love for a man who was no longer there. They made love, their bodies moving together in a slow, careful rhythm, their touch gentle and tender. They held each other tightly, their tears mingling, their hearts entwined. In that moment, they were not just lovers, but kindred spirits, bound together by a shared tragedy, by a love that had been lost but never forgotten. And in the end, that was all that mattered.